3 straight overtime games, no problem. Another rusty razor thin margin of victory for the Penguins. How did Sidney Crosby manage to steal the show again? And was this the biggest win of the entire season? Welcome to Penguins Digest. My name is Remington Kuhn. First and foremost, before we dive into what happened last night, you guys need to subscribe to the channel. 99.9% of you are not yet subscribed to Penguins Digest. I'm not sure what you're waiting for. Hit that sub button and we'll have the latest, greatest Pittsburgh Penguins news and content on Penguins Digest. But thank you for joining me here today. We are going to jump right into the content because I am fired up after a big win last night in Nashville. Let's get started with Pittsburgh seizing the moment. This team has been in some really close contests as of late. 3 straight overtime games and 2 straight games where they did not lead for a single second, but still escape with a W. Let's see what Mike Sullivan had to say about the win last night. Sullivan said, "A month ago, we probably don't win a game like that. I just think they're developing a certain resilience and a certain belief that if we stay with it, that we can come back. We've got to compete." That's probably what I'm most proud of the group. Competing and being resilient, not shying away from the challenge put in front of them. It doesn't matter if you don't lead the entire game. If you come out with a W, it doesn't matter. You still get those 2 points. Erik Karlsson also had some words after last night's game. He said, "I think today was a battle out there from the puck drop. I think they played well. We played well. Both teams made some mistakes. Both teams did some good things. But overall, I think both teams competed really hard. We were chasing pretty much the whole game. And it was nice to be able to come back 3 times and then get it done in overtime." The Penguins did not look good by any stretch of the imagination, but escaping with the W is what really matters. I'm so proud of this team and what I watched last night. The resilience is right. What Mike Sullivan said, the resilience of this team to continue to come back and win games even when they shouldn't. That's when you know you're hot, is when you're winning games that you probably shouldn't win. And last night was one of those games, in my opinion. They didn't have hardly any shots on goal. There were stretches where they didn't get a shot for almost 10 minutes. I mean, the amount of goals to shots on goal ratio was absolutely absurd. And when you're playing against Juicy Saros and that happens, consider yourself fortunate because it doesn't happen very often when you get to Juicy Saros like that. Rusty razor thin margins. Bryan Rust, overtime winner. The Rusty Razor wins it again for the Penguins, and that's why the title is fitting. Rusty razor thin margins. I can't think of a better way to explain what the Penguins have gone through in the last few games. 3 straight overtime games, and they've won 2 of them. Obviously, the Senators are still 1 point ahead of them in the standings after another big win last night. That team is red hot as well, but the Penguins are tracking them down and everybody else down in the Eastern Conference, and it's great to see. This has been a fun stretch of hockey for the Penguins. It seems like ever since we started doing Penguins Digest, the Penguins don't stop winning, and I love it. So let's just talk about the game. Obviously, you look at the box score, and, Bryan Rust got the overtime winner. Rusty razor thin margin of victory. It was not a pretty 3v3 in the overtime by any stretch of the imagination, but the W still looks the same. 5-4, Penguins take it in OT. Chaos doesn't begin to describe this, but it was another huge win for the boys, and you can sense new life with this club. I mean, the way that they fought, the way that they battled back, like Mike Sullivan said, resilience is the exact word that I would use to describe this team right now. They are a resilient bunch of guys, and they are going out there knowing that they can win. They are never out of a game. They can always come back. And like Erik Karlsson said, they came back 3 times in that game in order to get the victory on the road in Smashville. Not an easy place to play, but, you see the scoring summary there. Big contributions from Bryan Rust and Sidney Crosby, which we're going to get into in just a bit. This team can go as far as Bryan Rust and Sidney Crosby can carry them, and last night was proof that those 2 guys are enough to win a hockey game any given night, and Bryan Rust has been on an absolute tear. The Penguins started the season struggling, but as the season's gone on, after Bryan Rust came back from being injured, he has helped propel this team to that next tier. Their offense has never been a concern for me. It was a concern when we didn't have Bryan Rust, but in the 27 games he has played since he came back, He has been the best goal scorer on the team, especially in clutch situations. 14 goals this season. That's one behind Rickard Rakell for the team lead, and he's played much less games. Obviously, Sidney Crosby's line is going to put up those numbers, so Rust and Rakell are the beneficiaries time and time again. But Bryan Rust, not afraid to shoot the puck, 77 shots on goal, scoring on 18% of those shots on goal. He's just been so good for the Penguins. I was talking this morning about the best line combinations I've ever seen for the Penguins. And I mentioned that on the right side, I can't think of anybody I'd rather have than Bryan Rust. You obviously put Sidney Crosby at center, and then I'm debating between Chris Kunitz and Jake Gensel maybe on the left side. There's a couple other guys as well that have some consideration, but I'm between Kunitz and Gensel. And on the right side, I can't think of anybody else I'd rather have than Bryan Rust. Bryan Rust has been the best right winger for Sidney Crosby that I've ever seen. And you just can't say enough about him. When the Penguins need a goal, it's either Sidney Crosby or Bryan Rust that's able to come through time and time again. Nobody else is really doing that. It's Rust or Crosby. You need a goal. You need to win the game. It's Rust or Crosby. That's what it comes down to. And those two guys have always been able to deliver for the Pittsburgh Penguins. As we move into the next topic today, and shout out Mike Lang for this great call, one of the greatest calls in Penguins history. Slap me silly, Sidney. And that's what I found myself saying last night watching Sidney Crosby work. One of his best games, if not his best game of the entire season, coming off a game where he created 5 or 6 quality scoring chances for the Penguins and only had 1 point in that game to show for it. Last night he got 4 points, a season high for Sid the Kid. And yes, I'm still allowed to call him that. Why do people say that we can't call him Sid the Kid? He will always be Sid the Kid to me, because that was when I started watching hockey, was when he was Sid the Kid, and I will never call him anything else. So you guys can say what you want, but Sidney Crosby will always be Sid the Kid, no matter what his age is. Let's look at the headlines from the game last night. Rust scores twice, including OT winner, to lead Penguins over Predators 5-4. But look at the stars of the game. It wasn't just Rust. It was Sidney Crosby out there creating a ridiculous play by Crosby, setting up Bryan Rust on his first goal. Rickard Rakell also got an assist. Sidney Crosby undressed 2 defenders on that play. I mean, tic-tac-toe passing. He put on the brakes. It was literally posted by ESPN when it happened. Wow, what did Sidney Crosby just do? I mean, he did Sidney Crosby things. This is what he does. I mean, come on, guys. So tic-tac-toe passing, this line is really starting to show its chemistry, even more so than they already have. Erik Karlsson also deserves credit for finding Crosby on the stretch pass to the blue line to get that play to happen, to make that magic happen, and Crosby did the rest. That guy put on an absolute clinic last night. First shot on goal of the second period, Sidney Crosby deflected perfectly. Erik Karlsson laser from the point on the power play for the goal against the #1 penalty kill in the National Hockey League, the Nashville Predators. So give some credit to the Penguins for breaking through, getting that power play goal. The power play was dead before that. Nashville was putting on a clinic on the penalty kill, but the Penguins finally broke through. Sidney Crosby and Bryan Rust, the catalysts for Pittsburgh, showing up in the 3 stars of the game. Deservedly so. I mean, those guys were unbelievable last night. They were putting on an absolute show for us fans. And Crosby, in 34 games this season, finally back over a point per game. 35 points in those 34 games. Crosby trying to break Gretzky's record for most point per game seasons in NHL history. He's done it every year he's been in the league, and he's trying to do it one more time to break the record. He's on pace right now after last night's 4-point effort. And Crosby, you're one of the greatest players in NHL history, and you saw vintage Crosby on display last night. The Predators poked the bear, and Sidney Crosby took over the game, as he often does. Bryan Rust made a fantastic play to keep the puck in the offensive zone, and then Sidney Crosby did the rest. He set up Rickard Rakell to tie the game at 3 apiece, and then obviously you know what happened from there. Erik Karlsson rocket from the point. It was tied at 4. Crosby started it all after he was robbed on the doorstep. He stayed with it and made a one-handed pass to the point, and then Grizzy fed EK for a beautiful goal. And that was what tied the game at 4. So Crosby, throughout the game, leaving his fingerprints, leaving his footprints on that contest and helping the Penguins get away with the W, which is the most important stat, is getting that W. And that's what the Penguins have been doing lately, hunting Ws and finishing games. That's what I love to see from my boys. Graves and Shea, yikes. Now, I could just talk about positives for this entire video, but I don't want to. I don't want to. There's still some things that this team needs to clean up. And one of those things is Ryan Graves and Ryan Shea. That third line of defense might be one of the worst defensive pairings in the National Hockey League. And I'm not even exaggerating. I have no idea who came up with the idea to put these two guys on a line together. But oh my boy, they are a liability. And that is an understatement to say they are a liability. I mean, what the heck is going on back there on this third pairing for Pittsburgh? You can look at the box score, and they're not going to show up in the box score. There's a reason they're not going to show up in the box score. I was surprised to see that they are even ratings after last night's game, because every time they were on the ice, the Penguins were in their own zone the entire time. Every single time I saw Graves and Shea on the ice, it was defensive zone possession after defensive zone possession, trying desperately to keep the puck out of the net and protect Tristan Jarry. But Jarry had a lot more work cut out for him when these two guys were on the ice, and it was very consistent. Every time that those two were out there, the puck was in the defensive zone and they could not get it out. It didn't matter who was on forward. Those guys were a mess last night, and they are almost the reason that we lost that game. So the Penguins somehow killed a penalty despite those two being out there for the latter half of the penalty kill. But Shea and Graves, they just were not good. They were absolute dog water. Again, like I said, they might be one of the worst pairings in the entire National Hockey League. That's why I say we still need a defenseman, because these two are not going to cut it. I don't know if you bring back St. Ivany and give him another shot, or you let Klurman have an opportunity. I hope P.O. Joseph starts playing immediately, starting in New Jersey on Saturday, and get one of those two out of the lineup, because Graves and Shea together, it's just not good. It's just not good. And then more poor play from Graves almost led to a Predators goal, but crisis was averted late in the game as Jarry started to settle in and make some much needed saves. You look at the defensive pairings and the stats kind of show for themselves. These are the stats over the last 10 games. Obviously, they're skewed just a little bit because of games played being a discrepancy. As far as Shea, he hasn't played all those 10 games because obviously Marcus Pettersson was in the lineup until recently. But you can look at all the other numbers. We'll tell you that Shea and Graves are two of the worst players on the team, and you're only as good as your weakest link. And that brings me to my point. If your weakest link is Ryan Shea and Ryan Graves, then this team is not very good, because that weakest link is pretty weak. And I think the eye test tells you a lot more than the stats are going to tell you. That's why I'm not leaving that graphic on the screen very long, because watching the game tells me, as a hockey nerd, as a former player, if everything a player does is hurting your team, not helping your team, they are probably your weakest link. And every time I watch Ryan Graves, I get angry because he's not good. And when we got him, I understood what Kyle Dubas was trying to do. He's a defensive defenseman. That is his job. I'm not expecting him to put up points, but he's not good as a defensive defenseman either. He's been a liability. And him and Ryan Shea together is even worse. Grzelcyk has stepped his game up since he moved up with Karlsson. So the first two lines aren't that bad. Pickering had his moments last night where he didn't look great, but he also played a lot of minutes for the Penguins and did it well. So Mike Sullivan's rewarding Pickering with more minutes because he's earned it, and Graves and Shea, every time they go out there, I'm holding my breath. If you look back to the graphic I showed you just a minute ago, with the box score and the time on ice, another guy that didn't get a lot of playing time last night is Anthony Beauvillier. And Beauvillier was not injured. He played about 5 minutes last night. And it wasn't because he was injured, because I would have noticed that. So I think Anthony Beauvillier is starting to lose trust with the coach, Mike Sullivan. And as a former player, I can tell you, when you start to lose trust with your coach, if your coach stops trusting you and stops relying on you to play minutes, you're in the doghouse is essentially what it is. They do that in football whenever you fumble. Okay, coaches sometimes put guys in a doghouse if they can't trust you. Well, I don't think Mike Sullivan can trust Anthony Beauvillier. So I'm down to put Jesse Puljujarvi back in the lineup, give him another chance, or even Kevin Hayes, give him another crack at it instead of being a healthy scratch every game. But Beauvillier is not helping the team right now. His most effective games were at the beginning of the season when he played on a line with Crosby while Bryan was injured. Since then, Beauvillier has not been the same player. He has not been an impact player for the Penguins. You can argue with me on that. I don't care. I criticized Michael Bunting before he got hot, and now he's been one of the better players on the team. Beauvillier, I'm criticizing you next. He needs to step up his game, and if he doesn't step up his game, I think he needs to be replaced. I don't care if it comes from within the organization. Like I said, Puljujarvi, Kevin Hayes gets another crack at it. Call up Rutger McGroarty if you have to, or Poulin if you have to. It doesn't matter. But something has to be done about those three guys, Anthony Beauvillier, Ryan Shea, and Ryan Graves. Those three guys are costing the team in big ways, and these games would not be this close if it wasn't for those three guys going out there and being traffic cones. So that's all I got to say today. I had to throw a negative in there because there's a lot of positive right now with the Pittsburgh Penguins, but there's also negatives. And those three guys are by far the biggest negatives right now, in my personal opinion. So thank you guys for watching this episode of Penguins Digest. Obviously, we're fired up right now. The Penguins got another win. Big game Saturday in New Jersey, and then Philly Monday at home at PPG Paints Arena. So let's finish this road trip up strong on Saturday, beat the Devils, and carry the momentum back home against the Philadelphia Flyers, our heated rivals, my least favorite team in the entire National Hockey League. And I'm sure most of you agree with me on that. But thank you for watching this episode of Penguins Digest. My name is Remington Kuhn. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. So if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, and we will get you the latest Pittsburgh Penguins content. We will be keeping you in the loop as the season goes on and continue to break down every single matchup and talk about anything that is worth talking about. Thank you for joining me on this episode, and we will see you on the next episode of Penguins Digest.